Hello YouTube, it's Accurate again, back with a new video from the home studio, and in this one let's focus on this one, Elektron model samples.
Accurate Beats.
So I want to try to make a somewhat comprehensive review and overview and like my thoughts about the model samples. And this is from a guy who never used anything from Elektron before. Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I still have a bet going with a colleague of mine at my day job. He says that I can't get 1,000 new followers on Instagram in 30 days. Basically, I have to hit 4,056 followers on Instagram before the 14th of May. If I win the bet, he has to be vegan for an entire week, so it's for a good cause as well. Please just help me out here and follow me on Instagram. My name is just Accurate Beats in one word. Sorry, but thanks, and let's get back to the video. I've made a lot of videos over the last couple of years on different pieces of gear to make music with, like the SP404, Machine Micro, the MPC Live, the Akai 4s, the OP1, a few different drum machines and synthesizers and pretty much stuff like that. But I've never been into the Elektron workflow and I've never had any of the Elektron devices. And in all honesty, this unit was sent to me from Elektron, who actually have their headquarters 1 hour from where I live, so that's cool. So let's divide this video up into 3 different sections, where the first one is just a basic overview of what I'm talking about, what the model samples actually is. Then I want to get into what I really like about this unit and what I don't like so much. And last but not least, I hope we are coming to some kind of conclusion about what I actually think about this one. Alright, so that's it. Now, what are we talking about? What is this? Model samples from Elektron. It's not too big, it's really lightweight, it's built out of plastic, and it doesn't have much connections to talk about. It's a power input, a USB connection for connecting to the computer, MIDI in and MIDI out / through connections like this that requires this kind of breakout cable that gives you a normal big standard MIDI port. And we have a normal stereo output on jacks and a headphone output. So for anyone who didn't take notice of that, it doesn't have any audio input at all. So the model samples is not a sampler. Again, it's not a sampler. Instead, this is a sample playback device, which means you can load samples into it, you can sequence them and create rhythms and music like that. But you can't sample into it. You just can't. And as far as I know, this is Elektron's first attempt to make their workflow a little bit more accessible to the normal producer. And yeah, basically for someone like me who haven't been into the Elektron devices before. Both the Digitact and the Digitone and the Analog 4 and the Analog Rhythm and all of those older devices like the Octatrack, they're all kind of famous for having a workflow that seems to be not very intuitive to people, and well, this is their try to fill the gap. So the unit itself has a step sequencer down here with 16 steps, 6 different drum pads, a transport control as well as some different buttons for doing things, 13, 14, 15, 16 different knobs for controlling values, and a display. Definitely not the biggest one in the business. And it's kind of easy to make a mistake here and think that the model samples only holds 6 different samples at any given time, which is actually not true. They introduced a function here a couple of weeks ago, I'm not really sure, that basically lets you have like a sample on pad 1 on some of the different steps in the sequencer, but on other steps on the sequencer, let that sample actually be another sample in the browser. So you can have like the kick and the snare on the same pad, as long as they don't play exactly simultaneously on the same step on the sequencer. Well, it's kind of hard to explain exactly how it works, but it's not limited to only hold 6 different samples. That's not the case. And even though Elektron is a company that is kind of famous for making devices that requires a little bit of menu diving in order to get to everything that it's able to do, one of the selling points about this device is that it has more a knob per function than kind of any of the other Elektron devices, I think. There is still a function button here that needs to be pressed for accessing some of the different parameters on the knobs and pads and buttons, but it's not that hard to wrap your head around, and I actually find it kind of intuitive. Now, even though I like to do a little bit of finger drumming in my beats and I like to actually trigger my samples in the pattern where I want them to be in order to get a little bit of a human feel and a swing to it, you know? That's actually not at all how I've been using the model samples. I'm using the step sequencer on this one way more than I'm used to do on anything else like a drum machine or anything. And I must say that the step sequencer here is the best one I've ever tried. It's based on these 16 steps, that's one bar, and then you have 4 different pages, which brings you 4 different bars of music basically. So it's a sample playback device with a sequencer and a bunch of different knobs and buttons and stuff for changing your parameters, like pitch, decay, sample start, sample length, cutoff and resonance for the filter. You have a delay and a reverb send, an LFO speed and an LFO you can adjust to do different things. You have a volume setting, a swing setting and a chance/conditional trig value that is really cool to work with. I've had this one for a couple of weeks now and I do have some opinions about what I like most about it and what I like the least. So let's get into that. So let's start with the good, the positive list. First of all, the step sequencer and how it actually works and how flexible it is. Let's say that we're putting a few kicks and snares into the sequencer and we're kind of happy with just how it sounds right off the bat. From there you can easily adjust any of the settings per step in the entire sequencer. That is everything from changing the pitch to the sample start point, the volume, the reverb send amount or the LFO or the filter on just that sample, just that step. My 2 favorite functions of the entire step sequencer is these 2 knobs right here. The first one lets you take a step in the sequencer and actually move it off the grid, plus or minus. And we're not talking 16 or 32 notes here, it's even smaller increments than that. So just by moving all of your hi-hats a little bit late on the grid makes something go from to instead sound more like. And to someone like me, that's a crucial thing to have. I try to make my drums and my samples to have a little bit of an off-the-grid feel sometimes, either by playing them manually or moving the MIDI notes in my computer. This lets me do the exact same thing, but just by holding one of the steps and turning one knob plus or minus. That's a really great thing. And the other knob I'm talking about here is the chance/cond knob that lets you change how big the chance is for the sample to actually trigger on any specific step. And if you think a little bit about it, this makes your step sequencer, the length of it and like the different variations you can create, kind of endless. By using that function, I can tell the model samples to trigger one specific kick drum in one step only like 20% of the times that it's supposed to be triggered. Or maybe something like just the first time that I'm starting the sequence, or just the 3rd time out of 4. And yeah, that makes me create variations that are, again, kind of endless. And yeah, it's kind of easy to get tangled into the different numbers and the different values and percentages and chances of letting it hit or not. But it also allows me to come up with patterns that I haven't really come up with myself. It just happens dynamically in the machine. Or mathematically, I guess. However, the combination of these 2 functions in the sequencer really makes this something completely different than anything I've ever played with. Yeah, that was a long one. Number 2 is just the different sounds that it comes with. I mean, a lot of the samples that it comes with sounds good right off the bat, just as they are, but there are also a few different ways to get some synth sounds out of the model samples, just straight out of the box. And I'm pretty sure I met the guy who created this system and the different waveforms in Germany when I went there to the TSR 19 event. And basically you can just browse for a simple waveform in the model samples. And if you do that and just hit the loop function, you get different notes that are playable on the buttons on the bottom that normally is the step sequencer itself. So it's kind of a keyboard as well, and a synth, or yeah. So that's also the synths. They are really cool. Then I really like the fact that it's almost one knob per function here. It's really easy to get to know the device itself and actually learn which knob does what without having to read anything on the display or underneath of the different knobs. And I also like how the Elektron model samples is like a really good way to get into the Elektron workflow and understanding how they think about sequencers. So I guess that deserves a mention here by itself. And one of the most important things to me is how much fun is it to use the device we're talking about. And if we're talking about the Elektron model samples, which we are, the fun factor here is, I'm not going to say that it's 100% fun factor, but it's really fun. And even though my main device has been Machine from Native Instruments for a bunch of years, and I like the whole tactile thing of being able to play my notes into the sequencer, this device really makes me think about music and sequencing in a different way, which is both a bit demanding and a bit hard, I guess, but also really fun and cool to be experimenting with different values of how often do I want this hi-hat to be triggered in my sequence. I've never really thought about things like that because it's all static when I do it in a normal sequencer, you know? Well, that just makes it fun, you know? And I guess I could say more positive things about it, but you're also gonna see that in future videos when I'm actually working with music on this one. So let's stop it right there and go into the more negative things I have to say about the model samples. Starting with the drum pads on the unit itself. It has 6 different drum pads, which is problematic in itself because if I try to do something that I normally do with finger drumming, I have my kick, my snare, normally my hi-hat and an open hi-hat right here. So then I have 2 different pads to put sounds on. Again, this works really good when we're talking about the sequencer because you can change what sample it triggers per step. But for actually triggering them for like a live show or something like that, 6 pads just isn't enough. And the quality of them really doesn't compare to anything like the Machine Mark III controller, the MPC Live or the Akai Force. And to be honest, even the drum pads on the Roland SP404 are better than the pads on the model samples. The drum pads are velocity sensitive, so you can use them for playing stuff into the sequencer like that, but I just don't like using it like that. They are kind of good for what they are, and the purpose of using them for choosing one of the different tracks that you are applying the step sequencer on, it works like that, but as an actual drum trigger, I'm not sure. My next thing also has to do with the hardware and the buttons, because the different buttons, the ones over here for the transport control and the ones down here for the actual step sequencer, they are kind of okay if you press them hard, but they don't give you any type of tactical feedback when they're pressed or not. Not any clicky sound, not any clicky feel. So sometimes you just hit them like this and you don't hit them at all. It's not like sensitive enough or clear enough when you hit them or not. So that sometimes slows me down quite a bit. And even though I've used this one more in my bed and my couch than I've done with any of my other devices for a while now, I really wish that this one had a battery inside of it. Now it needs to be connected to the wall power at all times, which is okay, I guess, but if this was battery driven, it would have been better. And when we're talking about power, I wonder why they didn't make this one USB powered. In that case, it would be easier to power it just like that. I'm sure there's some kind of reason for that, but to me, that would have been so much better. Now it has this really small 5 volt power input, so it's 5 volts, you know, USB? Well, And another purely personal thing, it's white. I would like this one to be black. It would have looked so much nicer. And my last piece of criticism is that I think the target group here is a little bit, I don't know if I want to call it weird, but well, yeah. It's a really good way for someone like me who hasn't used anything from Elektron before to actually understand how they think about music and sequencing, and I'm getting into it and I'm excited about it. So that's smart, but I'm a sample-based guy. I use samples more than anything and I like samplers. This is not a sampler, it's a sample playback thing, and it's good for what it is, but this one really makes me want a digitact instead. Or makes me want a digitact as well. So yeah, now when I think about it, maybe that's a smart thing for them to do. Because the digitact seems to have pretty much everything that this one has, but maybe a little bit more advanced functions and a little bit harder to get to some of the functions sometimes, but it can also sample and sample itself, resampling, and it has better buttons and better knobs, bigger knobs, a better display, and it's black, and yeah, I think I want a digitact now as well. So now I'm getting sidetracked. What I want to say as well is that I sometimes make a mistake on this unit and I delete my entire sequence. So it's just a mistake that I make, but it's not the end of the world. You can just do the same command again and it undoes and you have your sequence back again. But you know I'm just in the wrong mode when I do it and I just delete the wrong thing and it's kind of clear, but it's a mistake I make a lot and it's irritating. So I've pointed out some of my favorite things that I think are really fantastic and phenomenal with the model samples. But we also have a few things that I'm getting a little bit frustrated with and that I think could have been done a little bit better. And a conclusion, the model samples from Elektron makes me want more of the workflow. Something like this really makes a big difference for me. It makes me think about stuff in a completely different way. And the whole thing about conditional trigs is a way bigger deal for me creatively than I expected. I made a beat in a live stream on this one a few weeks ago. Fuck, I think I lost the bass note again. And I had like a really long sample loaded into one of the slots and I created the sequence where I wanted the sample to trigger and I adjusted the start point of the different triggers to be on different places of the sample, so to speak. Because like that, I'm kind of always triggering the same sample and the same pad, but in different places on my 4-bar sequence. So maybe on the first trig, I'm triggering the sample from the start of it, but on the other one, on number 2, I'm just triggering it from the middle and onwards. And maybe somewhere in the 3rd bar, I'm going back and triggering a place in the sample that's between my first and my second trigger. I'm hearing how complicated it sounds, but it's not complicated at all when you're actually using the device itself. It's just different from the stuff that I normally use, which makes it more fun and more exciting and yeah, just a really cool experience. And of course, I also have to say that it comes with a piece of software from Elektron that lets you put samples into the unit from your computer. It's a really good software that does the job really well, and you get the samples onto your device and then you can just load them up through the browser on the unit itself. Now, I'm sure I'm going to use my model samples quite a bit here in my home studio. I'm not going to use it the same way that I've used Machine or the MPC or anything like that, but I'm having a ton of fun just loading a bunch of samples into it. Drum sounds, one-shots, and pianos and vocals and strings and all of the crazy stuff that I normally use. Because the sequencer on this one is really, really powerful and it's weird and quirky and really, really good. I'm sure you're going to see this one on the YouTube channel more in the future because I really enjoy it a lot, even though there are some small things that I think could be improved. And I really hope that I'm going to be able to get my hands on a Digitact as well, because that seems to be this one, but more, better, with sampling functionality. And yeah, I don't really know why I've missed that one in the future. I've really not understood the workflow and I didn't think it was for me and for hip-hop and for beats and the stuff that I do, but this one really fits into that workflow and to that genre, so I'm sure the Digitact would work for that kind of stuff just as well or even better. Now, I think that's pretty much it for this video, and that's my first impressions, quick review, pros and cons of the model samples. So, thanks a lot for watching. I hope to see you guys in the next one, and until then, ha det gott!
Accurate beats.